Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be chatting about Mistborn Era 1 versus Mistborn Era 2. Angela last year did a read along for Era 2. So if you're interested in seeing discussion videos for that, you can check out Angela's channel down below as well as the other individuals' channels. But we're just going to jump right into it. And we'll go ahead and start, Angela, with you, and then we'll kind of work our way around. So just overall, which do you like better? Era 1 or Era 2?
Hard.
This is like asking me, do you want a drama or do you want a comedy? Like, that's very,
Yeah.
it's very hard.
They're so different.
They're so different. Ooh, I think I have to give it to Era 1, but that wasn't it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be to like pick one.
You know, we'll go through various different specifics, and maybe you can keep tabs in your head of how many Era 1 wins and how many Era 2 wins, and then by that you can score it. But it's hard because it's about a feeling too.
Yeah, and I think it has to be Era 1, but it's hard because I've also read Lost Metal most recently, so my recency bias is high.
Yes. Right. What about you, Stephanie?
Right? I also think Era 1, but I really want Steris. Because I just identified with her so much. But yeah, I think it just depends on my mood. But if I just really, really had to pick, I would say Era 1. But they're both so good. So it could change any day. Yeah.
I mean...
Don't lie, you're Era 1. This isn't hard for you.
No, it depends on what... I have things that I liked more in Era 2, but I think overall Era 1 is definitely more my vibe. And it's also what I started Sanderson with. I think it's the first thing I ever read from Sanderson. So it also was a little bit more like mind-blowing because I hadn't read his magic systems and that kind of stuff from him before.
Yeah. That makes sense. It is not difficult for me to answer this question. I guess it was funny because I was talking to Sean before we started this, and I was like, oh, Michael can't make it, so it probably won't be that long because he won't be here to defend Wayne because that's kind of the thing. So Michael knows if he ends up seeing this, which he probably won't. He's very busy. But I mean, Era 2 has some really cool moments, and it has a very unique setting for fantasy. It's got a lot going for it. I mean, Era 1 is also, to what Roger said, more my flavor of fantasy too. And like him, I started with Mistborn in Sanderson's Cosmere, or just Sanderson's works in general. And then I've reread that trilogy several times now too. So I have a lot more about it that I connect to. And I just think it's more my cup of tea. And also I can't stand Wayne. I think this would be a harder question if Wayne didn't exist. But I don't need to keep, bashing him.
I was going to say, you guys up there hate Wayne, and Stephanie and I are like Wayne apologists down here.
I didn't hate him until book 3. Or not book 3, book 4. Books 2 and 3, I was okay. Just book 4, it was too much.
Can confirm my mom still loved Wayne in book 4. When we last talked about Lost Metal, she hadn't read it yet, and she loves Wayne. She still loves Wayne.
Love that for her.
I think the humor is more hit or miss. It's also more present in Era 2 than in Era 1. There's not that many funny moments because Era 1's tone is much bleaker than Era 2. So that's another thing too. Do you like the more upbeat fun? Because I have a family member who prefers Era 2 because he feels like the first series is just so doom and gloom, and he wants those upbeat moments. And he likes the bromance aspect of it too. So there's that element to consider as well. Since Roger brought up the magic system, and this being the first time, or it was in the Cosmere that he'd been introduced to Sanderson's magic, which form of the magic system did you prefer? Because we do obviously see it expand in Era 2 in really cool and creative ways, but Era 1 obviously is where it's all established.
Do I begin again?
Sure.
Okay. I actually prefer Era 2 by a lot. I have a lot of fun thinking of all the combos between being a twin-born, and I actually really like the limitations of the magic and how it's being blended with industry and everything like that. I think it's a more fascinating world to be in, and it can do really cool things. And then when we meet the people, I don't remember if it's South or North, but the people we've never been with, and they have their own ways of doing stuff with like connection, which we've never really in the I have a lot of fun geeking out about the magic system in Era 2, where I feel like there's a lot of untapped ground there. Whereas like Era 1, it's like, I really like it, but I understand the Era 1, the box that we're in for that. Like it's,
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
I agree with that. I think like Roger, that was my first intro to Sanderson really, was Era 1. So I was just kind of learning about magic systems and fantasy when I read that one. And then when we read Era 2, it was like, oh, this is really cool. So I think the Era 2 is more fun. But I have so much nostalgia for Era 1 magic. It's hard.
This one is not as difficult for me because Era 1 feels more like magic. Era 2 feels more like technology, which I don't like as much. And I also feel like Era 1, it felt more powerful than it did in Era 2. And I just like off the rails when they can do crazy things with magic. And Era 2 really dialed that back.
So sort of the opposite of what Angela was saying.
We are weird because we both are technically in almost the exact same field of science. Like we've stumbled into, we discussed the paper he's publishing because I know enough about it. And we have very different approaches to sci-fi and fantasy and what we latch onto and what we want.
Yeah,
like
Go ahead.
Well, it's just like, because for me, I went into my science field because it's like, well, magic is just like how to understand the universe you're in. So to me, if it gets close to science or technology, I'm like, that's the natural progression of magic, is the understanding of it and it having rules. If we're in that type of fantasy world, Sanderson makes them have rules. So that's how it works. So for me, I just geek out a lot, which is another reason why I geeked out a lot in Wall of Storms, which we were talking about off screen. But like, I have fun with it. I like when people break our real world and make it their own fun playground.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting if people who liked science fiction, if they tend to prefer Era 2's magic more since it has more technology.
That's an interesting question because Roger and I were just talking about how he's not as big on science fiction.
Yeah, and I've been getting super into it lately. So Era 2 has been super fun.
But I would also say Era 2 is more of like, it's not a cozy mystery, but it's more adjacent to the mystery subgenre than the sci-fi subgenre. Like, or sci-fi genre. Like if I'm thinking of a reader to give this to, someone who likes procedural TV or likes Batman and Robin detective stories, like that's who I'd give this to. Like Era 2 specifically.
Mm-hmm. Roger, I do have a follow-up question for you. I know you've said that the way that the fight scenes are written and how the magic is incorporated, you think it got better in Era 2. Does that contribute to maybe tweaking your answer here or not really?
I mean, I like the fight scenes better in Era 2, but I like just the sheer level of how it feels more magical in Era 1. And I think that's partially because the characters are still figuring stuff out. It's a little bit more of a mystery. In Era 2, it's more commonplace and people know more about it. It doesn't have that extra air of mystery. And I kind of like the air of mystery around the magic because I don't necessarily love hard magic systems. I kind of like it when it's a little bit more magical.
When there's limitations, but it's not as scientific or technological, basically.
Yeah.
I like the way that you see small world building details with the magic in Era 2. So there's the example of that politician that is a soother, basically. And people hated the idea of there being a politician that could affect their emotions because they felt like, oh, well, then he would only, or she, I don't remember. I think it was a male politician. It's such a minor thing, but they might have the ability to affect us when we're listening to their speeches. And so they feel very resistant to vote for that kind of a person. But then other magic, they do find themselves gravitating toward. They feel like, oh, well, I feel like this person would be honest. And so I thought that was really interesting. There's also some details about how the things that get sold in shops So there's using soothing again. Aren't there even parlors, soothing parlors where you can go to feel better? So I thought that was interesting because obviously in Era 1 there's so many restrictions on the magic that it's something kept to the shadows. So it's a cool world building experience, I guess you could say. But I think I'm with Roger on this one too, where I just like how powerful the characters can be in Era 1. I mean, the Mistborn are so overpowered, but it's so cool to see them face off against the Inquisitors. And you don't quite get that. There's more variety. Like you were saying, Angela, there's those different mixes in Era 2, which does create for some cool, the fact that the one person has the compounding and can basically Miles 100 lives, they called him, right? The fact that he's basically invincible. So it almost, to your point, feels more superhero-esque. Even though when you think superheroes, I think we used to think, oh, Superman, these overpowered beings. But now there's so many with Marvel Universe and DC having so many different things, we see it kind of zeroed in a little bit more. And so it does feel like you get these really cool comic book-esque powers, whereas in Era 1, you just have these really interesting, shadowy figures that are fighting in the dark. And I don't know why, I just think that that's cooler, I guess. But I'm sad that you don't get a true Mistborn in Era 2 the same way, you know? I miss that. Bouncing back to, I purposefully skipped characters. I didn't want to start with that one, but I wanted to jump to that one now, which has better characters and character arcs. And Roger, you can go ahead and start with this one as you have a contemplative look on your face.
I mean, overall, I like the characters and character arcs. There's more impactful ones for me in Era 1. Sazed is like my number one example because I just really like his arc in Era 1. But there are characters that I also really enjoy in Era 2, but there's also characters that I don't enjoy in Era 2, but I don't have the same thing in Era 1. There's not really a character that I'm like, oh, God, they're on page again. Like, it's not. I don't have
yeah.
That. I don't know. Spook's hard in the third book.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Spook doesn't bug me at all.
Oh, third book Spook always is like a chore for me. I don't understand it. Spook perspectives in the third book. It's always hard for me. I don't know why.
For me, so to that point, I think it's because I care so much more about what's going on with Ben and Ellen that it's one of those like, oh, where was Spook again? So it's he just didn't have a chance, you know?
Truly. And all I could think is, Spook, you're being played. You're being played. Get over it.
Yeah. It's one of the few times that you're clued in a little bit more, even though you're still unsure. His perspective, I think, is especially less interesting on reread. Because the first time you're wondering what is going on. Why is he hearing Kelsier's voice? And so you can tell that there's something sinister, but you don't quite know what it is. But then on reread, you're like, it's so obvious. How can he not tell? It's very unfair. Stephanie, what do you think?
I think Era 1, but I've also only read each of them once, so I don't have the benefit of looking back. But yeah, I think Era 1 for me, for sure. And I just really enjoyed following Vin and her journey. I think she was my favorite from Era 1. And Sazed was also one of my favorites.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give a cop-out answer. I think main characters, like protagonists, Era 1. I think I like the protagonist characters in Era 1 more, but I think the supporting characters are so much stronger in Era 2. Like, Ham and Breeze are fun and stuff like that, but they're not like, they're kind
There's
of
so many more too.
Yeah, but like, I love Steris. We're never going to say she's a main character, but I freaking love her. Marcy kind of becomes almost main character status, but not quite. She's more like Spook status sort of thing in terms of like character time. But like, I don't like Waxilium nearly as much as I like Vin. Like, Vin is so much stronger for me. And like, I think Sazed's arc is stronger than Wayne for me by a lot. Even though I don't mind Wayne's arc, but like, Sazed really goes. You consider
Sazed main character or side character?
I consider him a main character.
Because I found interesting is that he doesn't get that much time. I mean, he does have his I'm depressed time and I'm grieving in the third book, but in the first two, you hardly ever. You do get some in Well of Ascension.
I can like write probably a lot of pages on a lot of things that happened to him, like his ups and downs. You're really with him, like when he falls in love in book 2, and like I don't know. In the first book, he really isn't around. He's not even barely a supporting character in the first book, but he's the freaking hero of ages. He's a main character. Like that's what I decided.
I read this a couple years ago, and his storyline is one that's really stuck with me though, and stuck out.
Yeah. And I can.
It's always so obvious when anything pops up in the Cosmere. You're like, "That's Sazed," because it says, I think at the end.
So I think Sanderson got better at fleshing out, I think, the supporting roles for Era 2, which for me, I think makes Era 2. I think it helps for the type of tone it's setting because it's all about the banter and like all these characters doing stuff. Whereas Era 1, you know, you get more of the dread and things like that. But yeah, no, Vin's arc is really good. Like I really like Vin. And I like Elend.
Yeah. Elend kind of has an almost descent, but there's the interesting question of, is it a necessary, not descent as in he
kind of goes against his own ideals for the sake of.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing to dissect. I almost feel like I shouldn't even be in this video because my answers are just always Era 1. But I love Vin. I love Sazed. I think that even though I don't feel as strongly toward Kelsier as other readers do, the fact that he has such a presence in the second and third books, even though he's not there, just kind of shows how notable of a character he is. And it sort of speaks to, you get almost told, you know, the example of shown not told, you get almost told over and over again, Kelsier is just larger than life. And you see it all the time in the first one. And it's almost the effect that he has in books 2 and 3 that then shows that he has that larger in life perspective. So I do like his arc as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I need to elaborate too much. I love Vin. I love her arc throughout the entire trilogy. I like her individual arcs within each book. I love her. And I love Sazed. Which has better character relationships, though? Do you have any disagreeing? Are you going against what you said in the previous one, or what do you think? Angela, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think it's Era 2, mainly because it kind of goes back to how we were talking about superhero stuff earlier. So, like, if Era 1 is a superhero story, it's kind of like year 1 Batman. Batman's on his own. He doesn't have his Robin yet. That's Vin. She's dealing with being an orphan. Like, but then Era 2 is Batman and Robin, which is where I love Batman. Like, that's the camp because we have, like, these two personalities bouncing off of each other. And then we have Marcy and Wayne. Like, it's all about a teamwork. Everything is about, you can't do this on your own. You're doing it in teams, and the teams get shuffled around. So we have platonic relationships. We have romantic relationships. Like, I didn't expect by book 3 that I was rooting for Steris and Wax. That was not on my bingo card when I was first reading this series. Now, as a kid, when I read MISTBORN Era 1, did I wish someone at lunch would come sit at my table and read a book like Ellen did? Constantly. But it never happened. So I do have a soft spot for Elend and Vin, but I actually, although I think there's a lot of realism in their relationship, that's not why I reread MISTBORN Era 1. Whereas I reread MISTBORN Era 2 because I just want to hang out with these people. Like, what they're doing is not that interesting to me for, like, the first 2 books. I just like being with them. Hanging out, hearing Wayne's dumb jokes, which I know is not a selling point for you guys, but I'm like, it's just hearing his dumb jokes.
Yeah, I definitely agree Era 2, but I'm also not on the ship for Vin and Elend, which just everything about it, I should be on that train, but I'm just not. Like, it's just kind of meh. But the relationships in Era 2, I like had an actual emotional response to. And like Wax and Steris were adorable, even though Wax isn't my favorite character. I loved them. So I think it just got more emotion out of me, platonic or not platonic. I think it was done better.
What do you think, Roger?
I think the relationships feel a little bit more real feeling in Era 2 than they do in Era 1. I feel like Era 1 is so much more focused on the plot. Yeah. That we don't get as many kind of small interactions as we get in Era 2, and that's even with me not liking Wayne by the end. I don't necessarily love him and Wax's dynamic, but I kind of like the dynamic of like the group as a whole more. So I don't know, but I also don't love Vin and Ellen's like romantic relationship. I don't not ship things, but I'm also not like it's the best. They're just perfect for each. I'm like it's fine. I also
They're
really don't like.
oddly.
It's
I really don't like Sazed and Tinwil. I freaking hate Tinwil.
A big disagreement between us. We won't get into it, but
I'm on that train with you. I don't like what Roger's saying right now.
I love the two. I just think
I
it's so
do
sad
too.
and sweet.
I think she's
I think
a
it's more
dick.
of what I think it's
You
more
realize
of
what she went through, how many kids she had to have and got taken
you don't
away
want
from her.
to. You don't want to get into this with Roger. It's not gonna go anywhere you like it.
Oh, we're gonna get into it later, Roger. I'm writing a note to Vox for you later because you're objectively wrong. Anyways,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
for me,
Continue.
it's more like the emotions that Sazed has and that sweetness and the feeling that Sazed really probably didn't ever think he would have. Not probably. I mean, it is. He talks about how he never saw that life for him, and all of that I think is very sweet, and it's associated with Tinwil. So by association, I definitely have more positive feelings for her. But anyway, sorry, Roger. We all started cutting you off.
I mean, I still hate her. I think she's awful.
You mean yelling at people doesn't make them change their minds?
No.
wow.
But yeah, but I think it's because I have more negative associations with some of the relationships, and then like I'm not over heels in love with Kelsier. So yeah, I don't know. I think the relationships are better for me in Era 2.
I almost think we see more interactions between characters in Era 2. I think that's kind of what you were saying, Angela, is that they are more often doing things together. Sometimes it's Wayne and Marcy, sometimes it's Darius and Wax, sometimes it's Wax and Marcy and Wayne, and you just get more pairings. And a lot of Era 1 is just like Vin as a Mistborn going on some kind of mission, or Sazed is doing some kind of academic type of studying, or Elend is trying to figure out a political problem. So they're much more isolated and they kind of almost say run into each other in the hallway interactions that you get a lot from them. I think Vin and Elend I liked much more on reread. The first time, it's so unlike what you get typically with romantic relationships where the tension and the romantic feelings are so much at the forefront. And with the two of them, for Vin, it's so much more about someone she can trust and having a partner. And I think I actually really liked that about their relationship. But it's not necessarily we're so accustomed to seeing characters meet, and there's all this. There is that tension between. They don't really have tension, not romantic tension. They have the occasional, wow, Vin just slaughtered a bunch of people, like the kind of what that was a lot, Vin. They have that kind of in. Well, of Ascension, you see some of that. But by the third book, they're so in sync. And I really liked seeing that progression of a relationship.
I just don't know if I feel their chemistry. But I think that's also part Anderson didn't write chemistry between them. Like what you're talking about, there's not really any kind of sexual tension.
I definitely put probably my own, like, and this is one of those cases where you as the reader decide to add chemistry or not, I think. And I added chemistry. But also, Vin got to be a teenager. She's like 16 years old and she got to like have a crush in Final Empire. And I just needed her to have that little moment. She got to pretend she was someone else. She got to be confident. She got to have a crush. And then when she gets to like deal with her insecurities, because she does have to like heal through her PTSD and trauma, like I think there's a lot of realism in their relationship. I agree with everything else says. Like it's not necessarily my favorite couple, but it's a really solid, well thought out one.
Yeah. It just feels more like a partnership by the end, and I really like that. And we don't typically see couples through their relationship like that. A lot of times you see the build up and then you get the happily ever after of sorts, and you don't usually get to see the after. And with them you see that's what kind of the second and third books combined almost are, is the after is like, how do we make this work? And then we're on the same page, and now we can make sure all of our focus is on not just ourselves or our relationship, but on doing everything we can to save the world. And we know we've got each other's backs. And I really like that. I think to actually answer the question, I still like Era 1's relationships more. I do think there's moments between Vin and Kelsier that really, when you know that Kelsier is going to die and that he's been planning on it from the beginning, when you know that and you go back again and you see when she says, please don't abandon me, and you're like, oh no, but he's kind of planning to because he knows he has to die for the greater good. And when he tells her that they always wanted a daughter, those kinds of moments I really, really liked. I liked the moment when you see Clubs after he died, that the thing Sazed gave him, that he had it when he died, that kind of stuff. That got me so much more choked up than any of the moments of, is this person going to die in Era 2 and what that would mean for the remaining characters. And I think a big indication for me is in the third book when Vin takes in the mist and she becomes almost God for a while. I got sad at the idea because I thought, oh, this is what it means to be the hero of ages. She's going to become this new God figure on their planet. I was sad at the idea of her and Ellen being separated. It made me really sad. And then when they both died, I was like, I mean, it's bittersweet because they're together and they can finally rest. But at the same time, I don't want them to die. I want them to get to enjoy the peace that they created. Although there's obviously issues along the way. So in a way, death was more peaceful. But I don't need to go off too much about that. It always gets me. But
it does remind me that you were talking. No, go ahead, Stephanie. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I agree. As someone who has not reread either era, I agree that Mistborn Era 2, you see way more of the interactions. So I think that's why I'm more invested in those relationships. Yeah. But on reread, that could totally change. But I think he improved on the developing the relationships.
I think if I had a complaint about the relationships, it's that I wish we had gotten so much more Steris and Marasi actually interacting, because you don't see them interact very often. And that bummed me out because I really quite liked Steris, and Marasi had an interesting arc, and I wish we could have seen the two of them interact more.
Yeah. I will say the end of Shadows of Self, I really love the moment when Steris is just sitting in the room with Wax and it's stuff like that I really love.
In Era 2. The smaller moments in Era 2. In Era 1, because everything is so high stakes.
And that's like my general big complaint about rereading Hero of Ages is I'm like, plot-driven things on reread for me, if they're only plot-driven, which Hero of Ages is like 85% plot. I'm like, well, I know what the plot's doing, so I would rather watch it. But I can't.
I think that's part of why I don't buy in as much to Ellen and Vin, because you don't get to see them have cute moments. It's always like that's not the nature of the world. The world is going to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah, there is a moment where she gets to like in the study. She like comes into the chair with him. It's very cute. There are moments, but they're not.
There's like
it's cute,
a handful,
but it's
in
not
arguably
enough
more
to hold
pages.
the relationship.
I think that's accurate, Roger. You just don't. It's sort of back to what I was saying about you see them in the hallway. And that's in the second book. In the third book, they're hardly ever in the same location because she's getting captured by the enemy, or she's off fighting Inquisitors or something, or he's off
and
killing
the weird
Kolos.
Love triangle with Zane. That's the thing. The Zane thing is so bad.
I don't know. It's weird because I know people have said that Sanderson, in the words of Brandon or whatever, the WOB, that he says that was his attempt at a love triangle, but it doesn't read that way to me, because to me it never read like Vin actually loved Zane. It read like she was wondering if she was good enough, because she has these impulses to kill people, if she was good enough for it was almost, it felt like a growth for her to accept what she is and who she is and their dynamic, and Zane was a catalyst for that. But I don't disagree that I wish he himself hadn't been a catalyst, because he could have been a much more interesting character.
Yeah,
I almost kind of think he was a wasted character a little bit.
I read this the same year I read Eclipse and Twilight, and it definitely had that energy. For speaking as like, you know, a 14-year-old who was reading it, I'm like, but the whole time I never shipped it. I'm like, Vin, what are we doing? What are we doing, Vin?
We need the same people that ship Alina and the Darkling to read Well of Ascension and ship Vin and Zane. Does fan fiction of this exist?
Probably.
Just go be dark, edgy, Mistborn together.
Is there a Sanderson created character who like thinks about their sexuality a lot in their head? Because I think that's just a thing he doesn't do a lot, right? Like the idea of like
their sexuality or just sex. Because Wayne, I feel like, is always making sex jokes.
Wayne and Severo from Red Rising are two creatures who I don't think have ever dated a woman in their life. Like, I don't know. Like, they have a lot of talk. But in my head, it's like, I don't think Sanderson meant it this way because obviously there are other characters he's been doing this representation with. But, like, I could almost read her as demisexual or asexual, but I know that wasn't the intent. But her focus on relationships was so centered on partnership and trust. And it was never centered on lustful thoughts or anything like that, which is fine. But I think that's also just more Sanderson doesn't feel comfortable in that space of a character's head, which is also fine.
Yeah. I think that is kind of you're touching on something that I think is probably a bigger, maybe not debate, but personal preference, where some people will say, oh, his romances are always so PG, there's nothing going. It's kind of tapping back into the idea of the chemistry between them and the tension not being as present. I think that for me, I almost like it because it ends up creating more depth to the relationship. But I also like seeing characters in all facets of their relationship, I guess you could say. I like seeing characters grow to trust each other. I like seeing characters that really appreciate each other's personalities and their differences. But then I also like seeing characters just like think the other person is cute, you know, and you don't see that very often with the two of them.
For me, if we're going to go the route where it's not as tension driven, then I want to see more of their kind of cute interactions. And I don't get enough of that to feel the depth in their relationship, because I feel like I'm supposed to have buy-in from book 1 that carries me through books 2 and 3, even though they don't interact all that much. And so I'm just like, well, I don't have that initial buy-in.
That makes sense.
I think very single teenage Angela had a lot of buy-in. Vin was living my life for me. I really wanted her relationship to work.
Yeah, and I read this as an adult, so I came from it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So maybe
I read it as an adult in when I read this book probably 3 years ago, I'd already been with my husband for 12 years. So I'm like, this like ride or die, we are like forever partners. From like being at a couple balls together, like I just didn't see the progression of the relationship.
Yeah, because you do see time skips, because the first book is when they're getting to know each other, and then by the second one, a year has passed and they're not in their cute, he's sitting at my table phase. They're past that. And then also what you were saying about the stakes being so high that you really don't get the chance for them to...
Like, I can't totally complain, because it's like, well, it might be weird if all of a sudden they're having like a coffee date when like the world is ending.
There's Ash getting in their coffee.
I think they also applied fairy tale logic to it. Like, I know this is not a fairy tale book. It's nothing like Tress, nothing. But like, it's the idea of he's like a prince type figure, and this is our Cinderella. Like, she is, like, she's not like the other girls that are around. He suddenly is like, who is this person?
Cinderella.
Well, you know what I mean, though. It's just
I do.
So in my head, it's just like, I put a lot of those rules, I think, around the relationship where, you're watching a Disney movie romance. The rules are really different from when you're reading just like, I think, a romance book or something like that.
Yeah. Switching gears completely. Which setting did you like more?
Oh,
It's tough because at first I was like, well, Era 2's setting is more unique. And then I thought about it. I'm like, but that gothic look of Era 1 you don't see in fantasy all that often
The Bloodborne
either.
vibes of Era 1 all the way. Like, no question.
Yeah.
The creepy gothic architecture with all the mist. Way more my vibe.
Yeah, I
But
see it
also
more
love
clearly.
Dracula.
I see it more clearly.
Yeah, the one from Era 1 has stuck with me longer, and I could describe that one so much easier than Era 2.
Yeah. Also, that's my least favorite part of Era 2, I'm pretty sure. Is it's like, there's so much sand in the west, and like, and also like, I get angry because it's all circles, and I'm like, I live in a city with public transit like that, and I'm like, this is a bad design. Nothing should be spoking out of the center. This is horrible. This is horrible city landscaping. I hate this.
Yeah, because getting to two places that are relatively close on the circle is now more difficult than going across.
It's like
Arizona's a square grid.
Grid. That's how Fayetteville is. It's a grid.
I mean, I can relate because that's how UCI is. They want it to be like New York City. So like the center of campus is a park, and then all the buildings are in rings around it.
So yeah, I think that I like the world building in Era 2 more in terms of the stuff in it, but the actual like location, no. Although I wouldn't want to visit Era 1 because all the ash, so much ash. I can
I
feel
agree.
it though. But like I think the atmosphere is much more striking. Like I
Yes.
don't visualize well, but I can almost see Arrow 1 setting when I read it.
Angela, do you know about the game Bloodborne?
Uh-huh. I watch
Oh,
a lot
okay.
of people play those Dark Soul games. I don't play
I was
them
gonna
myself.
say, if you haven't, you should just watch the trailer for Bloodborne because
Have you
it
started
is
playing
beautiful.
Bloodborne now?
The plan is to start in May, which is coming up. My darn friends, I was like, guys, I don't know if I want to do this after playing so much Elden Ring. And then they're like, no, you have to. So they got it for me for my birthday. And I'm like, well, now I have to do it. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I've
I
been
can't
playing
imagine
Witcher,
Angela
which is
playing
kinda
it because you have enough stress fighting Thunder Jaws. Like,
No. No universe do I ever want to play a Dark Souls game. I'm so happy Witcher's so easy compared to Horizon. I'm just like, oh, these
Witcher
monsters,
is-
I just, whew.
Well, and you can play on an easy mode in Witcher, whereas the Dark Souls games, they're like, no, we don't want any of you here. You beginners, get out. We're here for the real gamers. I'm
it's
using
all
air
about the
quotes for
high
everyone.
stress, high reward.
The
theoretically.
elitism of
Yes.
it all. Anyways, but I do know what it looks like. I have watched it.
Stephanie, do you know what it looks like?
I'm not a gamer, but I'm a
Okay.
very visual reader. So just
Okay.
based on his descriptions, I have a clear visual in my mind.
Very nice. Yeah, I mean, I also just think that Era 2, some of my favorite world building details are references to Era 1 when they have basically like Tyndall Avenue or whatever it's called. I don't remember exactly, but all those little specifics and how things are named. I'm like, oh, that's cool, but it's just because it's a throwback, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Stephanie, you just have to Google Yarnum because it's like this is the setting from
Yeah.
Bloodborne.
Yeah. That's what I pictured.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's perfect. Which had better pacing?
Ooh.
This one I might have to give to Era 2 because Era 2 they're much shorter, first of all. And I think that they're paced in a way where it's very easy to keep going. Where Era 1, sometimes you're like, okay, like we were talking about earlier with the Spook, where you're like, eh. Or some of the plot lines, you're like, oh, I forgot about this part. I don't care about this part as much. So it's kind of the downside when you have a longer fantasy work where each of the books are like 700 pages or something. So I think Era 2 maybe has it for me on this one for the first time.
I think it depends on my mood.
Yeah.
Like if I want something pacey, I'm gonna go for Era 2. But if I want a slow burn, I'm gonna go for Era 1.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think because I think it's interesting because I've learned since being on the bookish internet that like what I consider a page turner doesn't mean it's fast paced. I didn't know that. I assumed if I was turning the pages, it's fast paced, but that's not true. So
I just find like how many people even remember. I always get them mixed up, Eden and Yeoman. One of them is in the third book, and one of them's in the first. The guy who
Yeoman's
is
in the first book, I think.
okay, he's annoying because he's always like, I don't even know why I'm a part of this plan. We're all gonna die, and he's helping out with the soldiers that are in the caves. And I feel like we always forget about that entire plot line because who cares? Like, I mean, you do care.
I think Era 1 has more variability in its pacing, whereas I would say Era 2 is more consistently paced.
Yes, thank you. That's a much more concise way to say what I'm trying to say.
But like,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily mind ups and downs. I don't remember ever being bored reading Era 1. It's not like I was ever like totally dragging my feet through any of the plot lines.
Oh,
But it
Well of
definitely
Ascension
has-
was rough for young Angela.
It,
Well of
which one?
Ascension was a rough time for young Angela.
See, Well of Ascension is the one. Oh, I will say though, the first time I read Well of Ascension, some of the Sazed, because I was so interested in what was going on in Luthadel, and then you'd be like, and then here's Sazed coming across some people in the middle of nowhere who seem to be afraid of the mists, and then here's Sazed going down with Marsh into this place, and he's taking sketches or etchings or whatever of what he's seeing there. And I remember the first time being like, I want to go back to the politics and the interesting weird guy who Vin's
Like,
interacting with. And,
that lore stuff is like, yes, please.
yeah. Second time around, I'm like, wow, everything's so obvious. It's right here in front of me. But I I don't know what it is. I think lore stuff on first read throughs for me is, sorry to keep referencing multiple read throughs. But lore stuff on first read is always second to characters. So I always want to come back to what I feel is the interesting character moments. And that wasn't quite an interesting Sazed character moment, because I also kept thinking, when's Sazed going to join back up with them? That's what I thought the first time I read Well of Ascension. But I still like all of the individual first era books more. I just don't know that every single moment is always as, like what Roger said, just copy paste.
I'm trying to think, because I think The Lost Metal might be the best paced book if I look at all of them for my taste, like all 7 books. If I'm looking at all 7, The Lost Metal, beginning to end, I loved the character changes. Every time I was in a perspective, I wanted to be there. I never had the, oh, wait, no, I wanted to stay. Right. I was instantly always hooked. I thought it was really well balanced between all the characters. And then that ending, I couldn't put it down. And I read it, and I was so stressed that I gave myself like a migraine. So, like, obviously that book kept my attention. But then Well of Ascension, in terms of like a chunky, slow burn fantasy, it's like textbook.
It's perfect.
It's like a perfect slow burn fantasy.
That one does not agree with. I'm trying to.
Oh, well, he doesn't. Roger and I have learned what we don't agree with.
Sounds like you were about to say Roger doesn't matter.
No, I've learned a lot. Like, oh, you're going to like this, but I gave this 5 stars and you're going to give it like 3.5. So, like, just know that that's what's going to happen to you.
Okay, this kind of ties to pacing in some regards, but which had better twists?
Ooh.
I mean, the twist in Shadows of Self is a pretty good twist. I gotta say, it's set up so well, and it's cool that it's across books. So I still think that's one of the best executed. But I also love all the twists and turns that you get in Well of Ascension. I like the fact that Sazed was the hero of ages. For some people, that wasn't a twist, but I just feel like you're led to believe it's Vin the whole time. And I also just think the world building aspects to the first one. I do think also, though, at the end of The Lost Metal, with the fact that, oh yeah, all those women who are being kidnapped, the fact that came back. So he did multiple across book twists that were not maybe quite the same as this epic world building type of thing, but they were interesting on a smaller scale. But I still gotta give it to, Era 1. I still can't get over the spy twist, because the first time I read that, I was like, it's been right in front of me the whole time.
No, it's Era 1, mainly because it's kind of like Sarah J. Maas syndrome, where like now I can kind of see a Sanderson twist, mainly because I've just read so many Sanderson. Like, it's just not as shiny. But when I first read Mistborn Era 1, I missed every single twist, and every single twist was a jaw-dropping moment. And very few memories of mine exist like that. And I'm just like, it's Era. I mean, I get mad because my partner read it and he guessed all of them, and I got annoyed. Like, he even guessed the spy thing, which I'm like,
yeah,
how'd you do that?
I'm frustrated on, sorry to do it again, on reread. It's so many of the twists are so obvious that I'm like, man, I'm stupid. I don't know how I didn't see this before. But maybe it's also, it, of course, that's part of it. But then exactly to your point is you start to learn when you've read so much of a certain author, their delivery. I think that's why the Shadows of Self one surprised me so much, because it really didn't feel like a signature Sanderson twist. It really, because I kept thinking, like, who's this person? And then when it turned out it was who it was, then I don't know why I'm saying it like we can't spoil things in this chat. But when you find out that it was her, you're like, I really wasn't, that was not even in my mind. And it's funny because when Jess was joining for Era 2, when she was like, I didn't even remember. So it was a twist for her again.
Yep.
What do you think, Roger?
I don't know. Better is hard for me, because I would say that the twists in Era 1 are bigger, more impactful moments, but the twists in Era 2 feel more like a mystery thriller kind of twist, where they're not necessarily as like expansive in scope, but they're still a lot of fun. So I don't know. That one's more of a mood-based one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think a good way to put it.
For me,
sorry.
No, I was just saying, I'm horrible at predicting stuff, so it's mood-based for me too. But I think Era 1 is the one that sticks in my mind the most.
I take off a point for Era 2 because I think the Bands of Mourning twist of his sister was like, it was too predictable in my opinion. I'm just like, of course your sister's evil. Like, what are you doing, Wax? And I thought that my first read, and I was just like, why are you trusting this woman? Why? Why are we doing this? So I think that's where I take a point off because I predicted that twist and I didn't like it. Like, plot-wise, I wasn't a fan.
I also think after the high of the twist in Shadows of Self, that was kind of a lower, and you usually want them to be bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of bigger and bigger, which one had bigger lows for you, and then which one had bigger highs? I mean, I think I know everybody's answers for this, but
I mean, Roger,
maybe I don't.
You go first.
I mean, bigger lows has to be Era 2, just because I was so annoyed with Wayne and Lost Metal. Because I wanted, like, there was some really cool things happening. I'm like, this is not your moment. Please just shut your face, sir.
But it was his moment. The thing you don't like the most was his moment at the end when he's dying.
Him wanting his damn hat. I was like, please stop. Please stop.
I didn't get to join your chat for the Lost Metal, but I'm sure other people also were annoyed when he was like, was it a big explosion? I was like, why? Why is that his question?
Because he is honestly that much of a doofus. And, you know, consistency even in death.
It was endearing.
Not everyone gets to grow. Not everyone grows in their life.
Yeah, you know what? That's a good way to put it. Not everybody gets to grow. He sure did not. No, just kidding. I know he has some growth. I just feel like he was always frustrating. Yeah. Sorry, Roger. Go ahead.
So, yeah, I mean, Era 2 had lower lows, higher highs. I mean, I think looking back, Mistborn Era 1 will always stick out more, whether that's nostalgia because it was my introduction to Sanderson or because it's, like, objectively higher highs. I'm not sure, but I think because Era 1 is more contained, it feels like a higher high, where like Era 2 is so much more reliant on me having context from other things for some of the impact.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say Era 1 has higher highs, Era 2 has lower lows.
What do you think, Stephanie?
I would agree with that. Yeah, because I don't really remember having like super lows for either one of them, but they're so different. Yeah. So I don't really remember being like bored or having low moments in most of those books. But Era 1 definitely for the highs.
I think Era 1 is the highest of the highs, mainly because I distinctly remember finishing Well of Ascension, which was probably actually, because I think Era 2 for me doesn't have highs or lows. It's a fairly consistent thing for me, where like I'm on board, you're doing exactly what you are doing fairly well the entire time. And I mean, I guess maybe the lowest is Alloy of Law, but again, I first read that as a buddy read with like my high school boyfriend, and that was an absolute blast. So that experience was like so fun for me. But I remember finishing Well of Ascension and then going to Borders to get the third book. Cause I'm like, what happened to Elend? Oh my God, what is happening? So I like instantly got the third book and then finished it. And then was in like a book hangover, which I didn't know that's what it was called then. But like, I didn't pick anything else up to read after finishing Hero of Ages. Cause I was just like exhausted.
And I think, so to slightly tweak the perception of the question, if you're thinking of bigger lows as in negatives, I think we've all kind of talked about that, because my answer would be Wayne for the low. So Era 2 would have bigger lows, but Era 1 would have bigger highs for all the reasons that we've discussed. But if you think of bigger lows as in the devastating moments or the moments that are very personal to the characters, I think Waxilium, the low that he has at the end of Shadows of Self, I thought was really well done. But I mean, the lows of a lot of people criticize.
Well of Ascension. The siege is rough.
Yes, I agree completely. That low is tough. And then I also think, though, that a lot of people criticize Sazed's lows in the third book. A lot of people are like, this is a low point for him, but I don't really like it as much. So if you slightly tweak how you look at the question, does that change any of this for you, or not so much?
I think for me, the Mistborn Era 1 is the most inconsistent in the highs and lows, both answers of the question. Like there's more like devastating moments and more like, this is epic fantasy, what's going on?
Right.
And also it had equally lows in the definition of, I'm bored right now, can we get to the point? Like because it's still like a really long trilogy.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it works for both answers. Whereas I think Era 2 is just a fairly consistent, rompy time, just going along.
Yeah. Yeah. Era 1 definitely had more devastating moments for me. Like,
Do you think that
I
too,
saw
Roger?
a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, the stakes are just so much higher in Era 1. So, like, Era 2, I don't know that you, even though it is like a personal low, obviously, when he has to shoot his dead girlfriend again, like, that's obviously rough. But, like, I don't know that it's the same thing as, like, finding Tin Will's corpse after she tried to help during the siege stuff, or, like, I feel like there's more emotionally impactful moments in Era 1 that are
Wasn't
gonna
Wax
hit me.
married to Leslie though? They weren't just
I
girlfriend.
couldn't remember. That's why I didn't say it. I was like,
I thought
think
they were
maybe
married.
They might have been.
Like they'd been together for like a decade, man.
So they're at least Commonwealth married.
Like
Yeah.
they were like they had a life. They built something. It was weird. It wasn't normal.
I think in a weird way, a criticism for the Lost Metal is that it almost got too big for its britches. It's like it was the strength in that series, I think, was that it had a more contained storyline. And then that third book got really almost epic in its stakes. And it oddly felt I think, Roger, you were kind of saying this too, almost like you had to know a little bit more about the Cosmere to appreciate all those things, which I don't think is necessarily even that profound of a statement in any way, because Sanderson, I think himself, has even said you're going to want to know more to have this crossover appreciation. And I know that for some people that's been a complaint, is that they kind of miss being able to go into any Sanderson series and not need those things and have these Easter eggs that are exciting, as opposed to you almost need those to even know what's going on. Because Marici's plotline, where she's interacting with all these interesting people that it seems like their magic has nothing to do with what's going on their planet, and then you get this being who's kind of sort of trying to take over and things like that, that all feels almost out of left field if you have only read Mistborn. And it still feels even a little out of left field if you've read some other things. So I weirdly think that when we got these bigger highs in Era 2, that it wasn't as good as the highs in Era 1, because Era 1 didn't rely really on anything else to have these enormous moments. Does that make sense?
I really like that he's starting to have these more detailed crossovers, because there's not really anything else that I can think of that has like such extensive multi-series crossovers. So the people who are like all annoyed that they're like, we liked it when it was super subtle and we had to like go into Reddit, I'm like, shut up. Let him have his moment of his epic MCU endgame. Just because I think it's fun and I think it's pretty unique to Sanderson's Cosmere that he's doing that stuff.
I think it's fun. I almost wish that we could have a series specifically like you read this series after you've read everything else. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Is kind of like that.
By Rhythm of War, because Way of Kings didn't really. I think there's validity in that complaint as far as in series, like, because you didn't, aside from obviously you likely read Mistborn Era 1 before Era 2, but Shadows of Self, Alloy of Law, those didn't require anything. But then you get, by the fourth book in that series and by the fourth book in Stormlight, suddenly it's like, make sure you've read all these other things if you want to appreciate what's going on. And I think for some people, it's not even just like, make sure you read this, but it's almost a make sure you've read it recently, because it's easy to forget some of those details. It's tough because I agree that it's really cool and it's really exciting to see all of these crossover moments. And it's a fun thing as a fandom to get to geek out over these moments and figure out which ones you missed and which ones you caught. Those are all really fun. But I think it does make it so that it's harder for people to get into all these various different series. And not everybody... Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I also think, like, obviously for the people who are like, I felt unprepared, their opinions are valid if they hadn't read other stuff. But I also think some people are saying it's an issue who aren't having that experience. Like, all of us here have read all the Cosmere, so we didn't read The Lost Metal having not read other things. We haven't read Rhythm of War without reading Mistborn. Like, that's not our thing. My mom straight up forgot so many things from Mistborn that I had to remind her about in Rhythm of War, but it didn't affect her enjoyment of the plot. She was having a blast. And in The Lost Metal, she has not read Emperor's Soul. Like, she hasn't done any of that.
I haven't read Emperor's Soul. I still
haven't
read
either.
it.
You had, oh gosh.
I
It's
know.
So
How
good.
have you
It's
not read Emperor's Soul? Have you not read the Arcanum Unbounded? Or the
No, I haven't.
the whatever it is?
Emperor's Soul is truly a delight. But
I've heard it's great.
like, she still had a blast, because I do think you're right in some ways. Lost Metal was trying to be a high stakes book that could never meet the stakes of Mistborn Era 1, but it was attempting, it's nuclear catastrophe sort of thing. But at the same time, it did have some like really fun action movie moments, like when Wax and Wayne have to fight their doppelgangers.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
that's just classic. It's just so good.
Yeah.
Like,
It did have some like, this is almost cheesy, but it's cool and fun. So
like, here comes the cavalry of Wax just
Yeah.
like dumping into Morrissey and Wayne's prop. Like, it just had such fun, bombastic moments.
yeah, it's a more fun series.
And
I think that. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I think the fun moments in Mistborn Era 1 are still epic and fun, but there's always weight to them. Like, Vin's like, what did I just do? Like, when she goes up the tower and kills everyone, like, that's epic and awesome, but also she just killed, like,
So
20
many people.
so many people.
Yeah.
Like, there's
Yeah.
heavy there.
Is that a fun moment?
Yeah,
it's a cool moment.
That's a wow. She's an amazing moment.
she's amazing, but also now she has literally all this blood on her hands. Like,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of levity, you could say.
Yeah.
I just
There's
never
no
understand the
unconditional-
complaint that people are like, it's too crossovery now. I'm like, okay, well, you can still read things in order. And I get that people just want to be part of like the most current hype for whatever book's coming out. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's almost starting to become something kind of Realm of the Elderlings EE, where there's a bunch of separate series, but they are starting to become more and more interconnected. And like, I don't know, people don't ever recommend that you start with Fitz and the Fool. They say start with Farseer. So I feel like it's something similar. Like, don't start maybe with Era 2 Mistborn, start with something more appropriate.
I will say the biggest difference there is how often Sanderson writes these series concurrently. Robin Hobb wrote a trilogy and then stopped, and then wrote another trilogy and then stopped. There was Mistborn Era 2 and Stormlight have been written at the same time.
Yeah.
And I
yeah,
think
but if you read them in
be-
publication order, you still have all the hints that you would want.
Oh yeah, no, I always recommend publication order to people who care about Easter eggs. Like, truly,
Publication order can be weird, though. Do you mean publication order? Because he doesn't always write sequels in order. Sometimes, like, he took forever to write The Lost Metal. So do you mean publication like you would read all those other things and then Lost Metal? Because I know some people go Mistborn Era 1 and then straight into Era 2. I think it's just keeping track. Some people don't want to have to, because maybe they have read everything, but they don't want to have these big moments that they are only really going to appreciate if they remember every single detail, if they read it recently.
But what
that
is a
kind of
big
stuff.
moment in the Lost Metal that's so dependent? Like a big moment, like not an Easter egg, but like
I think everything going on with just this, what is this off-world threat? That
yeah, but I mean, like,
concept.
that's more of like a nebulous, mysterious thing. Like, the climax of La Lost Metal is not dependent on the world of Elantris, on what's happening with the Ghost Bloods. Like, it's not dependent on any of that.
I think just also all of Marici's interactions with those other people. Because
I guess-
I could understand somebody reading that and being like, what even is this? And for some people, maybe it's exciting because it entices them to read more. And then for other people, it could take away from their experience with that series in its isolation. Because Era 1, I guess that's sort of what I was saying before, it does not rely on anything else to still be the way it is.
Yeah.
But Era 2, some of those moments toward the end too, a little bit.
I guess,
but it depends on the reader, because you were saying your mom doesn't feel that way, right?
Yeah, I think the average reader who's like reading the story as is, like, yeah, they're probably missing out on some world building stuff, but it doesn't affect the character arcs or the plot, which is first and foremost what most people are reading books for, right? And I think the person who does care a lot about that, they know how to do this. Like, we have the MCU now. People know how to Google a Wikipedia page and like figure out what you got to do.
I kind of wish there was somebody who felt this way in this conversation, because I don't necessarily, and I feel like I'm like trying to speak on their behalf.
Yeah, you're trying to be devil's advocate, but
Yeah.
you're like,
Not really devil's advocate. I just know people feel this way, and I think it's valid, but I don't feel this way. So I think they could make a case better for themselves than I can.
I'm
But
like,
if anybody
Read about
ends up
Easter
watching
eggs.
this,
If you cared about Easter eggs, you should have Googled it and done it in a better reading order. That's on you.
I
And
mean,
if you don't
and
care
also
about
to
Easter
Roger's
okay,
eggs,
actually, I will push back. I will push back on that because not everybody who is engaging with Sanderson are these voracious fantasy readers like all of us are, and they maybe don't even know about BookTube or the Bookternet as a concept, and like they just kind of stumble upon Sanderson's books at the store and then start reading it, and they're like, "Oh, I'll go ahead and read the next era of Mistborn because there's sequels. That's cool." And then they read those, and they're like, "What is this stuff?" And
But
I get that
I
most
don't think
people
we're
know.
hearing from those people though, because by our definition, those people aren't finding us on BookTube.
Yeah.
These
'Cause
people,
I just know that this idea exists. Is all
Yeah.
I'm saying.
I guess
'Cause
also
I-
to Roger's point though, this is one of the only fantasy series we have like this. If you want your standard run-of-the-mill contained trilogy, there are thousands. You can read any trilogy that is contained.
I'll be very curious if anybody who watches this feels this way, and then
wants to
please
fight me
feel
in the
free
street, bring it.
feel
No.
free to elaborate on your thoughts. And if you don't feel this way, feel free to elaborate on your thoughts. But now that we've gone through everything, I want to wrap it up by reminding us of our initial question: which do you like better overall? Very obvious. My opinion is still Era 1. But now that we've talked,
Did you
through
even
it,
give Era 2 a point?
I did for pacing.
Yeah.
Who did you want to go first? I missed the circle.
You know what? Let's start with Roger.
There
We'll
we
go in
go.
reverse for this one.
I don't think my answer has changed. Like, there are things that I like about Era 2. I really liked books 2 and 3. I like the kind of Indiana Jones vibe of Era 3. That was a lot of fun. So I think if you're talking just like fun, then I think Era 2 is probably more fun, but Era 1 has longer staying power for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
I
that's good.
agree. Era 1 has stuck with me more, and I've read that the least recent of all his stuff.
Angela, decision time.
So hard. They're just so different. Like
They
I
are.
know they're both fantasy books, but like it's,
By the same author in the same world. Like, they're more than just.
I know,
both
but
fantasy
they're
books.
they're
not the
very
same
different.
subgenre.
It almost
Yeah.
feels like comparing fantasy to like almost not quite classic fantasy, but more adjacent to classic fantasy. It's like comparing that to like we talked about how there's mystery thriller, like comic book superhero vibes.
Yeah.
Is what
I
it
feel
feels
like I'm being
you're-
asked to compare like a CW TV show to a Marvel movie. Like I don't. There's a different budget involved. Like
So, like, gut reaction, like, first thing, what comes
The
to
Well
your
of
mind?
Ascension is one of my favorite books of all time, so it probably has to be Era 1 based off just one book on its own.
Okay.
That's probably what it
Fair.
has to be. But
They
I
are
don't like
very,
Hero of
very
Ages as
different.
much as I like The Lost Metal. Like I think
What?
The Lost Metal stuck the ending for me more.
Wow, I'm sad that we're basically at the end of this video because I would be able to chat with you about that for a while. I'm just kidding. I know because you talked about plot is so much more of a thing, and yeah, it really.
I just
is.
think it's the character interaction pacing of the last book that Lost Metal will have more rereadability for me. And I've read The Hero of Ages 3 times now, and it has less rereadability each time I read it.
I'm just
Well,
thinking that when Roger started it, and he's like, "What's with Wax's kids?"
I
Him
like
as
that
a
he has
dad,
a kid.
Not my favorite.
Wax and Max.
Those kids have to show up other places, right? I mean, they were barely in it.
It depends on if we even stay in this part of this world. For all I know, the next trilogy is going to be like on a different continent.
It's the spy one, right? The next one's the spy one.
Yeah, it's supposed to be the noir 80s cyberpunky-ish. I don't know.
That should be interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if he
Okay.
can pull it off. His sci-fi is never as good for me, so we'll see.
I mean, after the Frugal Wizard, my
Yeah.
hope is quickly dwindling.
Yeah.
I haven't
That
gotten
wasn't-
to that one yet.
Good
Yeah.
luck.
I think
like
Stephanie will like
that
it.
Yeah.
It's fun enough, but
But
I
I'm
think it will have
going in
no
with-
staying power for you.
I'm going in with lower expectations.
I started it, and I have not picked it up yet since starting it.
I just think Sanderson needs to stay in third person. I just think he shouldn't let himself go into first person. It's safer that way.
Is it in first person?
Mm-hmm.
I like you don't even remember.
Oh, it's
I
in
just
first
remember, like,
person.
I just remember Michael Kramer's voice being like, oh damn, or whatever he says over and over again.
It's very much first person. It's like the Martian Project Hail Mary first person. It's a time.
You know what? I don't like The Martian. I DNF that. So this.
Well,
Yeah,
this
that
is literally him doing like Project Hail Mary meets Jason Bourne.
Yeah,
No,
like
I
I
don't
said, I
think
started it and then pretty immediately put it down.
Yeah.
So I need to pick it back up.
That needs
Or
a
do
strong
you?
word.
Well, I have to do a discussion.
I feel like
this
you
for it.
need to read The Emperor's Soul more than you need
Yes.
to
Oh,
finish
the Emperor's
Purple
Soul
Wizard.
is so
No.
much better.
Don't worry. Emperor's Soul is in the read along for this year because I'm going to read Elantris, The Hope of Elantris, and Emperor's Soul all in the same month. Is the
I
plan.
still haven't forgiven Stephanie for not finishing Elantris and not liking
I
it.
did finish it. Just not
Now.
in time for the live show.
I kind of do feel like, oh my gosh, what's her name? The main girl in that,
Serene?
or Serene, I think is how the.
I say Serene. Anyone who says
Yeah.
differently, I think that's wrong.
Anyway, I feel like she was like the prototype for Shalon, but I like her more.
No, whenever I read older Sanderson, I'm always like, oh, so you're this part of this Stormlight character. Like, Adolin and Dalinar are like two parts of Elend split into two characters.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
She
I
can't
do
handle
that.
that because she hates Adolin, and she's trying to not just have her knee-jerk response of like, Adolin!
It's okay. I know Elle hates Adolin, and Elle knows I love Adolin. And it's
Everybody disagrees with me, and I'm okay with it. I'm like, you know what?
Yeah,
Fandom-
I'm an Adolin apologist. I'm sorry.
I think
Yeah,
Elle has
everybody
good
loves him.
points. I think you have good points. It doesn't change the fact that he's a German Shepherd Golden Retriever mix, and I think he's
No,
adorable.
That's insulting to those dog breeds. He is. He's a himbo. He's so annoying. But anyway, you know what?
I love himbos, Elle. They're great.
This is MISTBORN, and it's been a fun chat. And I don't want this to go too off the rails. So thanks everybody for joining. Roger, I wasn't gonna say anything, and you brought it up. Okay. Anyway, thanks everybody who ends up watching this. It was a lot of fun. And let us know all of your thoughts. Let us know how you would answer these individual questions. Let us know if you are one of the people that feels like you kind of miss the more contained feeling, or are you like, what are people even talking about with that complaint? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you later.